Okay, so the iPhone 12 Pro Max and the Google Pixel 5 are quite possibly the two phones that give you the best camera experience out of a smartphone. And since both Apple and Google have been in an all-out war when it comes to who takes the best quality photos, I thought we'd take their best devices here and test out which one is better. Let's get started. So we're talking about cameras today, and one major new camera upgrade for the iPhone this year has been the addition of a LiDAR sensor. So when the first iPhone 12 Pro came out, I was actually using that LiDAR sensor to map out my living room and filming area to sort of get a better idea as to how I can move things around to not only look better, but to also maximize the space that I had to work with. All of this was actually being done with Polycam, and Polycam takes advantage of that LiDAR sensor and helps you accurately map out spaces and get measurements based upon those mappings. So if you are a designer looking to fill in some space, or maybe you just want to get a better idea as to how you can move things around in your home or office spaces, I'd seriously recommend downloading and using Polycam. Now, this app is just so much fun to use simply because you can get this 3D version of your space that you can view in a different way rather than just looking at measurements on a piece of paper, which is obviously super boring. It's also really awesome because you can share these scans via iMessages and recipients can view these 3D mappings without even having to download Polycam or any other software to view these 3D scans. So guys, if you have any of the new iPhones with that LiDAR sensor, or maybe even the iPad Pro that came out with that technology this year, definitely check out Polycam and use that LiDAR sensor to its full potential. Okay, so first let's get into the specs and compare the iPhone 12 Pro Max to the Google Pixel 5. We'll start off with the iPhone, and as you can see, we have a 3-camera array, and then we also have that LiDAR sensor, which is a huge component when it comes to portrait mode photos on the iPhone 12 Pro Max. Now, breaking down each individual camera, and we have a 12 megapixel camera system with an ultra-wide f2.4 lens, a wide f1.6, and then an f2.2 telephoto lens. So that's just a breakdown of the iPhone camera system. Let's move on to the Pixel 5. So the Pixel 5 has a 12.2 megapixel camera system with a 2-camera array, and those two lenses are set at a standard f1.7 and an ultra-wide f2.2. So as far as overall specs, these two phones are not very different when it comes to hardware, but in our test, we actually found that they perform very differently, mainly because of the software behind the photo taking experience. So with those components being so similar, I guess this is really a test of who has the better AI, Apple or Google. So for the daytime photo test, we actually found that both devices here performed really well. Now, that wasn't really a surprise to me, but I was expecting one device or another to sort of pull ahead in this competition. But to be honest, I don't think that either phone really won here in regards to just regular daytime photos. Now, what I did notice was that the iPhone photos are a lot less warm versus years past, and the Pixel 5 photos are actually coming out a little bit more on the warmer side. And that's actually very weird to see because typically the roles were reversed. But actually, that doesn't really matter anymore. You can actually customize these settings in post and change that color temperature that you're aiming for in your photos in the post-production process. So with regards to just regular daytime photos, I think it's a wash here because that color temperature difference doesn't really matter anymore. But both of these cameras are taking really awesome, good quality daytime photos, which are absolutely amazing. And I think anyone would be pleased to get these photos out of their smartphone devices. Okay, so let's move on to portraits, one category that both phones have done really well for the past few years. And when taking a look at these photos and comparing them, I have to say that the Google Pixel 5 does a lot better of a job taking portraits of plants or objects that have a lot of holes or space behind them. But I also noticed that the blurriness and overall photo quality on a larger object are shot best with the iPhone 12 Pro Max. Now again, both phones are performing really well here, but I have to say that the Pixel 5 does win in this overall portrait experience simply because it handles a lot of space behind objects really well, and the iPhone unfortunately just does not do that just yet in this photo taking experience. Now, that leads us to the nighttime photos, one of the biggest talking points when it comes to both phones here. So the nighttime photos coming out of both phones are absolutely amazing, but the iPhone to me clearly has the edge, and I think that's because it has a much larger sensor which is able to capture a lot more light. Another thing that I noticed is that the Pixel 5 tends to add a lot of artificial light where it's not actually needed. It kind of oversaturates colors as well in really dark situations, and the color temperature is really inaccurate when there's not enough light. I guess to me, when I think about the Google Pixel 5 and nighttime photos, I think it's a lot more guesswork versus hardware because the hardware is just not there. So all the AI processing is kind of just guessing at what the photo should have looked like, should there have been enough light, and that's sort of not yielding the best results here in the Google Pixel 5. The iPhone, on the other hand, does a really good job at creating this really even profile of light. The color temperature is spot on, and I think it does a much better job when there is hardly enough light to deal with for a photo. So with that said, I have to say that the iPhone 12 Pro Max definitely won the nighttime photo contest, and I'm actually really shocked to see this because the Pixel lineup has held that crown for a very long time. So hats off to Apple for working on nighttime photos because they are now turning out really well, and I think a lot of people won't be scared anymore to take those nighttime photos in fear that they'll actually show up just really grainy as we have been in years past. Now we have one last thing to talk about here, and that is the video quality coming out of both of these devices, and here I shot in 4K 60. Now, as far as color science, autofocus, and overall quality of both of these phones, there are definitely no problems here, but the biggest difference between the iPhone and the Pixel is the stabilization. So the Pixel 5 uses electronic stabilization powered by AI technology, but the sensor in the iPhone 12 Pro Max is actually physically stabilized, which does actually make a huge difference. For the most part, in this video, you can clearly see that there isn't really much difference until you get to those major steps where electronic stabilization seriously overcompensates, whereas the iPhone does not. Now, when you compare the out-of-the-car window footage, though, it's clear that both phones can handle that situation very well because you can see that the car is moving up and down, but the phones are extremely stable. So between the two, I have to say that the video quality is extraordinary across the board. The autofocus works great, but the stabilization is a game changer, and the iPhone just does it a lot better. Now, another thing to add is that the iPhone does have the capability to record Dolby Vision HDR video, whereas the Pixel 5 just cannot. Now, that's one of those features that I'm not really going to count towards this test because not too many people will be shooting in full HDR and actually be using it. But because the iPhone still has that better stabilization, I have to still give it the win here because everything else was pretty much even until that specific test. So to wrap all of this up, here are our results of the photo and video test in all of the categories we shot in, and I think it's pretty clear here that the iPhone has won. That's not to say, though, that the Pixel 5 is a bad phone, and as we talked about, the Pixel 5 was very close in pretty much all of these categories. One other thing to add is that the Pixel 5 is way cheaper. So when you factor in costs, the iPhone may be a lot more expensive, but I personally don't think that the difference in quality is equal to the amount of extra money that you have to lay down for that iPhone experience. So those were our tests, those were our results, but you guys ultimately will be the judge here. Which phone did you think was better, and which phone do you think gives you the best photo and video experience here? Let me know in the comment section down below. But anyways, guys, that's it for today's video. But if you want to see more upcoming content, definitely get subscribed and also hit that notification bell button to get notified when we release any new content. So with that said, I hope to see you in the next video. But until then, I hope you all have an awesome day.